Welcome, everybody. This is Web Yeshiva. I'm Uri Cohen, and this is part of the series called The Order of the Seder. My section of the Seder is Barech, but it's really what I'm doing is a topic that's in between Barech and Hallel. And you could argue that really it fits better with Hallel than Barech, but it's in between, and that is the part of the Seder that's associated with Eliyahu Hanavi. In the Haggadahs, it just says, Shefoch chamatcha, pour out your wrath against those nations that do not know you, etc. Like a couple of lines. We're not actually going to address Shefoch chamatcha in this session. That's really a separate topic. Maybe I'll do that a different year. We're going to talk about the significance of Eliyahu at the Seder, but before we get started, I want to share a few pictures, which are mostly pictures of the people whose ideas we're going to be quoting, but also a few pictures from Haggadahs. So let's do that right now. Okay. The pictures I'm showing now are of people whom I'm going to be quoting in the order I'm going to be quoting them. I didn't find pictures of everybody, especially not rabbis from the Middle Ages. For some reason, there aren't so many pictures of them. This is going to be the person quoted in sources 3 and 16. This is Professor Dov Noy. He founded the Israel Folktale Archives as well as the Folklore Research Center at Hebrew U, where he taught, not surprisingly, Jewish folklore. The article that we're going to see near the beginning, the article on Eliyahu Hanavi in the Encyclopedia Judaica was written by him, as well as hopefully we'll get to source number 16, something from him as well, written in Hebrew. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev is famous for being the Hasidic Rebbe who always judged everybody favorably, but he also wrote a substantive work of Hasidic thought, a Kedushat Levi, which we're going to see in source number 4. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, also officially known as Rabbi Irving Greenberg, is an Orthodox rabbi who founded the pluralist organization called Klal. I recommend the book that we're going to be seeing a quote from. That's called The Jewish Way. I'm holding it up right now. That I think it's the best in-depth presentation of the Chagim, the Jewish holidays, in English. Moving right along, Rabbi Dr. Neil Gilman was a prominent conservative rabbi who taught Jewish philosophy at JTS. The paragraph we're going to be looking at is from his commentary, which is one of several commentaries in the book called My People's Passover Haggadah. It's part of a 10-volume series called My People's Prayer Book, edited by Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman. We're going to see him in source number 20. Rabbi Hoffman won the National Jewish Book Award for this series, and I've only used, maybe 3 or 4 of the volumes, but there's a huge amount of useful material there, with the understanding that it's written by non-Orthodox people. A lot of very, very useful historical stuff. This, of course, is Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah. And we'll see a quote from him, what he says about opening the door. This is one of the few pictures of the Chavetz Chaim. I assume that it was colorized later. We're going to see a brief quote from his Mishnah Berurah. One of my teachers, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, who for many years was the rabbi of Efrat, as well as the head of Or Torah Stone Institutions. I learned in his kollel. He's in this picture. His Rebbitzin, Vicky Riskin, is standing behind him, and I chose this picture because in the source we're going to see from Rabbi Riskin, he quotes her. This is the Vilna Gaon, very important, very influential Lithuanian Achron. Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman is a Reform rabbi who's professor of liturgy at Hebrew Union College. He's written a lot of stuff about the Siddur, and that includes the Haggadah, and we're going to see something of his as well. And finally, on the people, Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky, from West Hempstead, where my family lives. He's a professor of neuroscience at Bar-Ilan University and has written many columns for Jewish Action, the OU magazine, called What's the Truth About? I quoted them a lot, these articles, in my Web Yeshiva series I gave several years ago called Jewish Myth Busting. You can still watch it on the Web Yeshiva site if you'd like. Rabbi Zivotofsky also has a website full of research that he's done with Dr. Ari Greenspan. It's called Halachic Adventures. Those are the pictures of some of the people we're going to be quoting. Moving on to a few, just a couple of, well, three images of possibly Eliyahu from different Haggadahs. This one is from what they call the first New York Haggadah, published in written in the 1400s. Just going to look very briefly at the bottom here. It's a little hard to see, but you see there's on the left is somebody opening his door and looking outside, and it says Yinglin or something like that. P'tach hadelet, open the door. And who does he see when he opens the door? Somebody who's riding a donkey and blowing a shofar. And on the right hand side of this guy blowing the shofar, it says Mashiach. Okay, there's this tradition that the Messiah will come riding a white donkey. This is on the same page of the Haggadah of the text that I mentioned before. The big word here is shafoch, pour out your wrath. Why? Presumably because the only time that the enemies of the Jews will be punished by God is in the future when Mashiach comes. Okay, a bunch of Haggadahs have had traditional medieval Haggadahs had pictures of Mashiach on this page, but notice that what we just saw is that the guy was opening the door. Okay, which probably the custom started of opening the door, and then the artist put it in. We'll talk shortly about where that custom came from. This is from the famous Washington Haggadah, which is in the Library of Congress. It's also from the 1400s. It's actually by the same scribe, Yoel. Also has the Shafoch page. And the bottom of the page is an illustration of, which looks a little bit similar to what we just saw. Remember, it's by the same guy, but it's much more ornate, and not just because it's in color. There's somebody on the left who is opening his door and holding a cup, and he sees, well, there are no labels here. Presumably it's Mashiach riding on a donkey with a family of people clinging to him, and one of them is holding a cup. Okay? Presumably because opening the door became a thing to do, as we'll see shortly when saying Shvoch HaMadcha, and it's also either right before or right after. That's when you fill up the third cup of wine. Fourth cup of wine. You just drank the third cup at the end of Barech, at the end of Birkat Hamazon. So you fill the third cup, and if you're filling up the cup that later became known as the cup of Eliyahu, that's when you'll do it as well. Some people call this a picture of Eliyahu. However, it's possible that people looking at this Haggadah over the ages said, "Oh, okay, because this is the page of Eliyahu." But the artist, at least same artist in the first Haggadah, labeled this person on the donkey Mashiach, which makes more sense in terms of the classic sources. However, once this part of the Haggadah, this in-between part, in between Barech and Hallel, became associated with Eliyahu, presumably people started saying, "Oh, we're opening the door for Eliyahu," perhaps. This is a work of art called Elijah's Cup by the Jewish artist Eli Ben Zaken. It was on the cover of Kashrus magazine in 2004. It was also earlier on the cover of Jewish Homemaker magazine. And you see a few kids who are around the Seder table. One of them has already fallen asleep, and one of them is watching very carefully the wine level, because lots of people trick their children into thinking that we expect Eliyahu to drink from the cup of wine. Well, I guess it's up there with all the things that people do to keep their children awake. But I wouldn't recommend it, just in case your child ends up becoming disillusioned. I don't recommend lying to your children. Sooner or later, a sensitive child might say, "Oh, what else have my parents been lying to me about?" Okay, And I want to just share a very different approach to Eliyahu, which is in the Passover Haggadah graphic novel. Have it right here. This is the English edition. There is a Hebrew edition as well. Both of them have the full Hebrew text, but the English one also has the English translations by Jordan Gorfinkel and Erez Tzadok. And just briefly, I want to look at the 2 pages that include, in this Haggadah, that include, Eliyahu showing up. Okay? It's very clever because the text is the translation of Shfoch Chamadcha, but the pictures tell a different story. You have the parents and children very excitedly looking at the cup of Eliyahu, and then you see the door of the house, okay, and you see they're going to the door. They're going to open the door for Eliyahu, but what they don't realize is right outside the door are several evil-looking people who seem to represent the enemies of the Jews through the ages. Oh no! Unsuspecting people inside, they're running to the door. But then one of the enemies looks up, and you could tell from his beads of sweat that something terrible is about to happen. Oh no, what's about to happen to them? Now we move to the second to last page. Dun, dun, dun. It's Eliyahu as superhero, saying the words, "Unleash your outrage on them." Okay? And of course, he doesn't actually kill them. He frightens them away. But as they're opening the door from the inside, they open the door. The kid looks right and left, and she doesn't see Eliyahu. And as she's doing that, you see Eliyahu has snuck in, and he is drinking the wine while the family members are looking outside. And you see he's also, in case you didn't notice from before, he's also very, very well built. And not the usual way that we understand Eliyahu in Jewish folklore, but it's an interesting approach, and it certainly works well in the context of the graphic Haggadah. So I would like to go through a source sheet now. This is the slide, the official slide for this session. I have a source sheet which I have uploaded to the WebYeshiva site, and you can download it. Actually, I think I didn't upload it, but I'll be uploading it to the page of this class right afterwards. We are going to go through it right now. I call it Eliyahu, Come On In. It's just 3 pages. We're going to be going through the sources right now, and as opposed to what we could have done, we could have given a class on the cup of Eliyahu, or we could have a class on opening the door. We're going to talk about both of those, but I would like to talk about them connected to the larger topic of welcoming in Eliyahu, which is done 2, or depending on how you count, 2 or 3 times in around the year in Jewish rituals. So I want to, and it could be that as we'll see shortly, the welcoming in Eliyahu at a Brit Milah could very well have been the source for people coming up with the idea that Eliyahu shows up to every Seder, which I'll say it now, I'll probably come back to it later, but there are no classic Jewish sources that say that Eliyahu shows up to every Seder. Eliyahu is not mentioned on the page of Shfoch Chamadcha. However, there are associations that have accumulated through the ages, and then people connect the dots and they say, oh, Eliyahu comes to the Seder. So what we're going to look at the rest of this session is where people came up with that idea from. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's a folk idea as opposed to an idea that we find in the sources. So let's talk about Eliyahu as we find in the rabbinic tradition, Eliyahu before Mashiach comes. Okay, well, how do you know the Mashiach is going to show up with Mashiach? It says it. It says it in Tanakh. It's the Haftorah of this week's Parsha, Shabbat HaGadol, also my Bar Mitzvah Haftorah. In Malachi Perek Gimel, the first part of the Perek is actually not on the Haftorah, but Hashem says, Hinani sholeach malachi, I am sending my angel, or my representative, which is kind of ironic because the prophet who's saying these words is called literally Malachi. Who is this? Okay, skipping to Pasuk Chav Gimel, Hinenu Chishuech Lochem et Eliyahu Hanavi. He is named. He is Elijah the prophet. Lifnei Bo Yom Hashem Hagadol Vanara, before the great and awe-inspiring day of God shows up. But earlier, back to Pasuk Aleph, he is also called Malach Habrit, the angel of the covenant. The question is, what does Eliyahu have to do with covenant in general? Is it the covenant of circumcision, Brit Milah? So we'll see shortly. The rabbis had an answer to that question. But the idea that Eliyahu never died, that's in the story of Eliyahu in Sefer Malachim. Eliyahu went up to heaven in a fiery chariot, thus opening the imagination to the possibility that, if he never died, well, then he can come back in the future. And then, by the time you got to the Mishnah, by the time you got to the Gemara and Jewish folklore, Eliyahu goes back and forth between heaven and earth. There are zillions of stories in Jewish folklore about Eliyahu connecting heaven and earth. But just in the Mishnah itself, source number 2, Rabbi Shimon says, Eliyahu will come, meaning with Mashiach, lahashvot hamachloket, to smooth out debates. In other words, to resolve debates. As opposed to the simple understanding of the verse, which I skipped, but it's at the end of source number 1. Eliyahu will reconcile parents and children to each other, and that's the second opinion in the Mishnah. The rabbis say, Eliyahu will come to bring peace. But there's this idea that took hold of the rabbinic imagination that in the future, a great leader who was able to go back and forth between heaven and earth will answer all of our questions, will be able to resolve all of our debates. And thus, as mentioned here in source number 3, this is just a summary, but an idea that became popular in the late Middle Ages, that the idea that Eliyahu will reconcile our debates in the future, that's explicit, that's in the Mishnah. But the Jewish folk idea associated this with the word teku, which sometimes appears at the end of a discussion in the Gemara, where the Talmud does not have a bottom line. So teku, it's a debate among the language experts what exactly it means. The usual translation is, the usual understanding of teku is that it's take home, we'll let the question stand. Okay, but a folk explanation, and as I pointed out in the Jewish myth-busting course, almost all the time, when you have an explanation of a word, that really this word is an acronym and it stands for something else. Posh really stands for port out, starboard home. No. Almost all the time that's just made up afterwards, unless it's a scientific word. Radar and scuba really are official acronyms. But this is an example in Hebrew, teku. People said, it stands for Tishbi, meaning Eliyahu. Tishbi yitaretz kushyot bibayot. Eliyahu will answer all of our questions. The idea of that, the premise of that is correct. Applying it to the word is not correct, but that took hold of the Jewish imagination so much so that in source number 4, Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev in the late 1700s asks, starting with that premise, that Eliyahu will answer our questions in the future, he says, working with the assumption, which is debatable, that in the future, not only will Mashiach come, but also the resurrection of the dead will take place at the same time. Rambam did not believe that, but okay. Rambam thought it would take place much, much later. So Moshe Rabbeinu will come back to life. So if you have Moshe in the room, why are you asking Eliyahu your questions? And he answers, it's because Eliyahu has been here all along. And I heard this from Rabbi Riskin, meaning he quoted Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, that a leader of the people needs to be in touch with the people, needs to understand what the people need. And with all due respect to Moshe Rabbeinu, he died a long time ago, so how would he know what we need? Eliyahu has been alive the whole time, and that's why he will be the one to answer our questions. Okay, very briefly, a custom started at some point in the Middle Ages. It's mentioned in the Sefer HaManhig by an author who died in 1215, a custom that at the end of Shabbat, after Havdalah, there are songs about Eliyahu. You'll find them in a standard a bencher, birchon. Not just some people just saying Eliyahu Hanavi, which is fine. But if you look, like there are a bunch of songs in a row. If you look at the like standard texts or official texts, all about Eliyahu. So the Sefer HaManhig says why Eliyahu on after Shabbat? Because there's a Gemara in Eruvin Daf Mem Gimel that says Eliyahu, meaning in the future, Eliyahu, when returning with along with Mashiach, we have a promise that he will not come right before the day before Shabbat or the day before Yom Tov, because that would be a big pain for people. Like presumably when Mashiach and Eliyahu come, we'll have to deal with a lot of things. So it would not be fair to do that as we're getting ready for Shabbat or Yom Tov. So it makes more, based on that, the Sefer HaManhig says it makes sense that Eliyahu will come after Shabbat. Meaning if he can't come on Friday, and he certainly is not going to come on Shabbat, so as Rabbi Greenberg elaborates on this idea in source number 6, the odds that the Mashiach could come on any particular weekday should be 7-1, but the rabbis calculated, well, he's not going to come on Thursday night. That's the time you're starting to prepare for Shabbat, Friday. So Friday night is Shabbat. So a Messiah destined to come on Friday night or Saturday night would come on Saturday night. In short, chances of Mashiach coming on Saturday night are 2 out of 7. So that's twice as good as any weekday night. So it could be that's why. Maybe there's some explanation, but the Rabbi Greenberg is elaborating on the folk idea as expressed, as cited in the Sefer HaManhig, that Eliyahu is more likely to show up with Mashiach in the future right after Shabbat. And Rabbi Gilman points out, he's not the only one to say this, but I like the way that he formulated it, that Eliyahu is the personalization of redemption, because he never really died. He was taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot. So he is the ultimate liminal personality. Ooh, that's a word you don't hear every day, certainly not outside of academic works. Liminal is the highfalutin adjective that means on the threshold, the in-between. So Eliyahu has mastered the threshold between life and death. Is he alive or is he dead? He's kind of in the middle. As such, it makes sense that Eliyahu returns to earth at various liminal moments. Okay, what are liminal moments? Moments of the in between. Okay, so you have a Brit Milah. Brit Milah is when the baby enters the covenant. Okay, you have Havdalah. Havdalah is when we separate between Kodesh, Shabbat, and Chol, weekday, and you have, well, the climax of Pesach Seder. Oh, okay, so that's the folk part. But as we're going to see, that's going to be the Eliyahu is going to be brought in, associated with opening the door. Okay, so that's the opening the door is the symbol, if there is such a symbol, of the liminal, the threshold. There's a lot to talk about the significance of the threshold and then how that ties in with Yetziat Mitzrayim. But let's not do that now. Instead, 1 second. Yeah. Instead, I'd like to talk about why Eliyahu is associated with coming to a Brit Milah. So it's true that, as we saw, Eliyahu is called Malach HaBrit. Okay, but why? So the answer to this question is given in 2 classic sources: Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a post-Talmudic midrash, and the Zohar, Kabbalistic text published in the 1200s. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says as follows, that the Jews at the time of Eliyahu, many of them were, especially in the kingdom of Ephraim, kingdom of Yisrael, as opposed to the kingdom of Yehuda, were neglecting Brit Milah, and Eliyahu was part of the kina, as in the zealousness of trying to stand up for Brit Milah, for God. Is this explicit in the verses? Not necessarily, but the idea that he was the kanai, the zealot, that's clear in the verses about Eliyahu, and that he's called Malach HaBrit. It makes sense to associate them. But according to this midrash, God was actually annoyed with Eliyahu for being too zealous. He says, "What you were zealous way back in the desert when they called you Pinchas." This is a midrashic idea that Pinchas and Eliyahu are the same person. So it's true that Pinchas did an act of standing up for God, which God stood behind at the time. But God says, "You're going too far with accusing the Jews about Brit Milah. Chayecha, by your life." God utters an oath. Whenever the Jews do a circumcision, you are going to have to watch, meaning you are going to need to testify that the Jews are keeping Brit Milah and that your zealousness went too far. From here, based on this, it's in the Midrash itself, Pirkei Rabbi Yezer, the sages instituted that we should make a special chair, have a special chair for the angel of the covenant at a Brit Milah. And that's what we do. I saw somewhere that it didn't actually become a common custom until a few hundred years after this, the time of the Crusades. But in fact, that's what we do. We have a chair. It's usually the chair which the sandak, the person holding the baby, sits on. That's not the point. The point is that the idea of a chair for Eliyahu, because Eliyahu, the presence of Eliyahu is at every Brit Milah, that's actually, that goes pretty far back. That goes back to this midrash. Okay? The Zohar takes it a little further and says we have to announce this is the chair of Eliyahu, and in fact we do that. And the Zohar presents it as a punishment for Eliyahu for going too far. It's for not defending the Jews to God, but accusing the Jews. So Eliyahu from now on is going to need to defend the Jews by testifying to God, because remember Eliyahu goes back and forth between heaven and earth, testifying to God that the Jews keep the mitzvah of Brit Milah, continue to do so. Okay, so far we talked briefly about Eliyahu being sung to at the end of Shabbat, and the idea of the presence of Eliyahu at a Brit Milah. Okay, we're going to hold off on Eliyahu for now. We'll come back to Eliyahu in a few sources. Trick question. Why do we open the door at the Seder? Now, this is a trick question because the classic rabbinic answer, there isn't a classic rabbinic answer. There isn't. The fact that Haggadahs have stage directions, open the door after Birkat Hamazon, that doesn't necessarily go back that far. At some point, a custom developed of opening the door at the Seder. We don't know exactly when, and we don't know exactly why, but as early as the times of the Gaonim, meaning the rabbis who were the heads of yeshivot in Babylonia in the, let's say, 700s through 700, 800, 900, 1,000, for a few hundred years there, they presented a couple of fascinating suggestions. This is really off the beaten track, but it's classic answers, early medieval answers, to explain, to suggest why to open the door. Take a look at source number 10. This is Rav Matityahu Gaon. To be honest, I hadn't heard of him. There are a lot of Gaonim. He's not one of the better known ones. But it's his. He gave an answer to the question, a different question, okay, which is going to tie into this. There's a custom of saying near the beginning of the Haggadah, what we call halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction. Everyone who is hungry, come and eat. Okay, he says that's an ancient custom. Fine. Okay, they would get the table ready. They would not. He's saying this is what it used to be, and he's writing in the 9th century, the 800s. It used to be that our ancestors would not close their doors the entire Seder. And they would say this at the beginning of the Seder so that poor Jews would be able to come. If there's anybody out there who doesn't have a Seder, come to my Seder. So you open the door and leave it open. You have an open door to welcome people. And that was a good thing. But he says nowadays, Jews are more likely to live among non-Jews than among Jews. So Jews try to help the poor Jews before Pesach by supplying them with what we now call ma'ot chitim, supplying them with money to be able to have their own Seder. And therefore, there's no need to keep the door open. Fine, so we open the door at the beginning of the Seder, and then we can close it. He doesn't make that clear, but it sounds like that he thinks the original idea of opening the door was at the beginning of the Seder and leave it open the entire time. Now let's skip to the 1800s. Okay? A Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Siegel, I don't know that much about him. He was a student of the Ohev Yisrael, Rav Avram Yoshua Heschel of Apta. And in his book, Likutei Tzvi, he presents a theory, which, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have historical information for, but it's a fascinating theory. And he says as follows. He agrees with Rav Matityahu Gaon that they used to open the door at the beginning of the Seder. Okay? Top left of the page. Second. There. He says, but eventually it was no longer necessary, presumably because of what Rav Matityahu said. Jews were giving tzedakah to help the poor before Pesach. So therefore they pushed to the end of the Seder, near the end. It's not literally the end, but after Birkat Hamazon is near the end of the Seder, the opening of the door. Why? A different reason, because of the alilot dam, because of the blood libels. And that is, unfortunately, there were a bunch of times in Jewish history where Jews were framed. A dead Christian baby was dumped in front of a Jewish home, and then the Jews would be blamed for it. Oh, the Jews used the blood of Christian children to bake the matzahs, and that would be the excuse to murder the Jews. So Rabbi Siegel suggests the Jews opened the door at the end of the Seder to make sure that there wasn't a dead body out there. And in case there was, they would presumably have to do something about it very quickly. They left the doors open at the end of the Seder out of fear. And he says, and that, it's a theory, he says, that fits with associating the opening of the door, not just with anything at the end of the Seder, but specifically the page in which we say, God, pour out your wrath against your enemies, the people who try to destroy us, because that's why they open the door, because of the enemies. Fascinating suggestion from Rabbi Siegel in the 1800s. As opposed to the more standard rabbinic explanations, the Ramah on source number 12 quotes a couple of people. He quotes the Mahari Bruna. Well, actually, first he says, we open the door. I'm in the middle of source number 12. Why do we open the door? In order to remember that it's Leil Shimurim. This is a night of God protecting us, which may or may not tie in with the blood libel, but the Ramah does not say that. And in the merit of believing that God will protect us, God should send Mashiach, redeem us, and Mashiach will pour out God's wrath against our enemies. The source of this is the Mahari Bruna. So he doesn't tie in the blood libel, but he does explain why opening the door would be associated with saying, God, punish your enemies. When is that going to happen? At the time of Geula. And even though we don't have time to go through it now, the entire Hallel section, and in the class I gave a couple of years ago at WebYeshiva, the entire Nirtza section, almost the entire Nirtza section, are associated with the Geula of the future. So you could argue as soon as Birkat Hamazon is over, the rest of the Seder shifts towards the future. So everything from here on, the rest of the Haggadah is associated directly or indirectly with thinking about God redeeming us in the future. Source number 14. Rabbi Riskin quotes his wife as saying, we don't open the door to let Eliyahu in, we open the door to let ourselves out. Only by doing this do we prove that we have truly internalized the historical message and meaning of our freedom. Ooh, that's an interesting one. And it turns out that even though Mrs. Riskin did not realize this, over 1,000 years beforehand, one of the Gaonim said the exact same thing. Source number 15, Rav Nissim Gaon, on the same page of the Otzar Gaonim as what we saw before from Rav Matityahu Gaon. First, he quotes his father as saying that his father's personal minhag was that he left the doors open. He left the door of the house open the entire Seder. they leave the doors of the house open. Why? When Eliyahu shows up, we will be able to run out and greet him right away. That's why we open the door, so that we can go out and greet Eliyahu. We're ready for Mashiach. We're so ready, we're opening the door. We're getting ready to leave. Not to bring Eliyahu in. That is not a classic Jewish idea, but rather for us to go out. And why should the Pesach be associated with Geula? Okay, and then he brings some sources about that. But there are plenty of sources that Pesach is associated with redemption in the future, and there are plenty of sources that the part of the Seder after Birkat Hamazon is associated with redemption in the future. However, moving on to page 3, we have one more thing to talk about. Eliyahu's cup. Oh, one more source on this. Source number 16, back to Professor Dov Noy. We saw a picture of it at the beginning. He suggests that they used to, agreeing with Rav Matityahu and the father of Rav Nissim Gaon, they used to leave the door open the entire night. But unfortunately, there were practical considerations that led to people to stop doing this, whether because of thieves or because of anti-Semites or anybody. You don't want to just wander into your home. How about the cold? If you're in Europe, okay, it's not especially warm during the time of Nisan. Here in Israel, it's usually pretty mild weather. So the Jews eventually stopped leaving the doors open the entire Seder, but they would go back to the original custom or keep a remnant of the original custom by opening the door at Shfuch Hamatcha in order to say, we want God to send Mashiach and Eliyahu and redeem us, and while redeeming us, also take revenge on our enemies. So that's, Eliyahu is kind of in parentheses here because it's Mashiach, but Eliyahu comes with Mashiach. Okay. But now we get to Eliyahu's cup. Okay, and this is the part that's the most folk related because it's the latest. Meaning, unlike the Eliyahu being associated with Brit Milah, where the custom of the chair, the kisei shel Eliyahu goes back, more than 1,000 years, and opening the door for Mashiach started at some point in the during the time of the Gaonim. Okay. But a cup? What does a cup have to do with Eliyahu? Well, the first time that we have this mentioned in print is in source number 7. That's Rav Zelekman Binga. He was the son-in-law and student of the Maharil. Maharil was a very prominent Ashkenazi rabbi in the 1400s. Unfortunately for Rabbi Binga, his writings were lost until the 1980s. So they weren't very influential. But since the 1980s, when they were published, people have said, oh, this is it. Until they found the writings of Rabbi Zelekman from the town of Bingen, until they found that the first written reference to posts of Eliyahu was in the 1600s, and now it got pushed back 200 years to 1400s. And what does he say? I see that there are people who at the Seder pour an extra cup that they don't drink. And they say, this cup is for Eliyahu, but I don't know why. And then he speculates, oh, maybe it's because it says in the Mishnah that even a poor person should have 4 cups at the Seder. So if we're expecting Eliyahu to show up with Mashiach, well, then we'll have a cup of wine waiting for him. That's a speculation. But it's interesting that, like as with many customs, as I mentioned last week with Kitniot, this is one more example of rabbis coming afterwards and trying to understand a custom. People do this. It's not clear how many people did this in the 1400s, but this is the first mention that we have of pouring an extra cup and calling it the cup of Eliyahu. A couple hundred years later, source number 18, we're not going to go through this, but I'll just summarize. Rav Moshe Chagiz, who was a Sephardic rabbi from Israel, who spent a number of decades in Europe among Ashkenazim, and somebody asked him about this crazy custom, and that in some places in Germany and Italy, 3 days before Pesach, they set up the table for the Seder, Most of us don't really have the luxury of doing that. We usually clean much closer to Pesach. And at the beginning of the Seder, they set aside a cup. They fill it with wine. They say, this cup is for Eliyahu Hanavi. And then after the Seder is over, they and the leader of the Seder has gotten up. They put on we would say a chair. He says it's a couch, whatever. The couch on which the leader of the Seder was reclining, they put the full cup of wine on that couch, and they say, this is for Eliyahu. Okay, that's the way it's described. And the person who presented this custom to Rabbi Chagiz said, this is crazy. What does Eliyahu have to do with Pesach? This is just stupid, right? And Rabbi Chagiz, who was not Ashkenazi, and at the time anyway, it seems that it was only an Ashkenazi custom, he says, no. Don't be so quick to disrespect customs. In fact, he says, the idea of Eliyahu showing up to a Brit Milah, that's a serious, that's substantive. And then you can connect the dots and say that, well, in the Seder itself, we connect the blood of Brit Milah and the blood of the Karban Pesach. So you could say, you can say, oh, the same way that he's speculating, but people seem to have come up with this idea before Rabbi Chagiz, since they were saying, oh, this is the cup of Eliyahu. If Eliyahu comes to every Brit Milah, maybe he also comes to every Seder, because after all, the idea of Brit Milah and the blood of the Brit Milah and the blood of the Karban Pesach, that there's a clear connection with. Eliyahu is connected with Brit Milah, so maybe he's also connected with Pesach. Okay, could be. You'll notice that the idea of Eliyahu's cup seems to be associated with the idea that Eliyahu is coming in. Until the 1400s, we don't find this idea anywhere. As we said earlier, that Mrs. Riskin came up with the idea, which it turns out was from Rav Nissim Gaon. Opening the door was so that we could go out and greet Eliyahu. But at some point, I don't know if it was the pictures in the Haggadah depicting people opening the door and then Mashiach, or maybe Eliyahu and the donkey are outside. Who knows? Or maybe it's just what Rabbi Chagiz suggested. Eliyahu shows up at every Brit. He suggested every Brit meal at every Seder. Maybe. Having said that, there's one more interpretation of Eliyahu's cup, which we haven't mentioned yet, and this is really the connects to an entire other shiur, and that is, how many cups are you supposed to have at the Seder? So the standard answer is 4. But if you go back to the Gemara, and you'll see that there is a manuscript of the Gemara that sounds like one opinion says you should have 5 cups. So most of the Rishonim rejected that and said, no, the other manuscript is correct, the one with 4 cups. But because that some Rishonim, or at least some ways to interpret some of the Rishonim, are to say that we should have and we should drink a 5th cup. After all, it's not clear why we have 4 cups, but one of the interpretations, certainly the most famous interpretation these days, of why we have 4 cups is because of the 4 expressions of Geula, V'otzeti, V'tzalti, V'ga'alti, V'vakachti. But the same verse goes on to say, V'eveti, God will bring us to the land. Okay, so that's part of, you could argue that even though that's not brought in the Seder, and there's a whole discussion, why does the Seder not seem to focus on the land of Israel? But having said that, it's not crazy to say a 5th cup for a 5th expression of Geula. So the standard interpretation was, we don't follow that opinion. That's it. 4 cups. There are a lot of 4s during the Seder. This is another 4. However, rabbis learning through the Gemaras and the Rishonim, sooner or later find the opinion that says that there should be a 5th cup. And at different points in Jewish history, there were rabbis who suggested actually having a 5th cup. And this idea, which doesn't seem to tie into Eliyahu at all, the Vilna Gaon is quoted as tying that debate, 4 or 5 cups, tying that into cup of Eliyahu. Remember, both Rabbi Chagiz in the 1700s and Rav Zelikman of Binga in the 1400s, they both were trying to figure out why people would have a cup and call it the cup of Eliyahu. They came up with different theories. The Vilna Gaon is viewing it through halachic glasses, halachic lenses, and saying, no problem. By the way, the Vilna Gaon is quoted in the book Mat'amim, which is I have the book here, which on the side is called Otsar HaMitzvot HaTa'amim VaMinhagim, and then on the front it lists something like 6 or 7 different books that were published together. Basically, it's a collection. Sefer Mat'amim is one, or actually 2, of these books, pulled together lots of material from lots of rabbis. I was very excited when I saw a copy once. Literally once I saw a copy in a store and I bought it. The Vilna Gaon is quoted as saying as follows: the reason for the custom why we pour a 5th cup and we call it the cup of Eliyahu is, I'm in source number 19, because there is a debate about the text of the Gemara, whether we need a 5th cup or not, and the halacha was not decided definitely. When Eliyahu shows up with Mashiach, remember what we saw way back in source number 2? There's a rabbinic idea that Eliyahu will answer all of our halacha questions. Okay, Eliyahu will clarify this question. Eliyahu will tell us whether we are supposed to drink a 5th cup or not drink a 5th cup for sure. V'alkein, and therefore mozgin hakos misafek. Out of a doubt, whether we're supposed to drink a 5th cup or not, we pour a 5th cup, but we don't drink it, which is a little bit like the compromise with the mezuzah. Is the mezuzah supposed to be straight up and down, or is it supposed to be horizontal? Compromise. Mezuzah is on a slant. At least that's the Ashkenazi custom. So the Vilna Gaon, seeing this custom of having an extra cup on the table, not drinking it, and calling it cup of Eliyahu, says, oh, I see. It's tying in not to the idea that Eliyahu is going to show up at our Seder, because like I said, there aren't rabbinic sources that say that, but rather the idea that whenever Mashiach comes, and now after Birkat Hamazon, the last parts of the Seder, Halal Nirtzah, we're thinking about Mashiach, we're thinking about the future Geula. Part of the future Geula is that Eliyahu will show up, he'll answer our questions, and he'll tell us whether we should drink a 5th cup or not. So it makes sense, he says, to have a 5th cup as a compromise. We pour it, but we don't drink it. We call it the cup of Eliyahu. Not that Eliyahu is showing up to a Seder, but Eliyahu in the future will tell us whether to drink it or not. Having said that, that doesn't work for the masses, because you call this cup Eliyahu's cup, and then the implication is we expect Eliyahu to drink it. So it must be that Eliyahu is showing up, and it's possible that what the Vilna Gaon says is the reason why the cup started. It certainly is a reason the rabbis like, but look at the way that Rabbi Hoffman responds to this Vilna Gaon. He says the Vilna Gaon connects the 2 cups halachically. Okay, more likely, Rabbi Hoffman speaking as a historian, more likely the connection is topical historical. The name, the cup of Eliyahu, is a result of merging the older custom of holding a 5th cup in reserve for the final redemption, meaning the idea that we're not going to have a 5th cup until Ve'eveti, until Mashiach brings us all to the rebuild land of Israel, Beit HaMikdash, etc. That idea, merging that with the newer custom of awaiting Eliyahu as harbinger of that redemption. Oh, opening the door, we're expecting Mashiach and Eliyahu. Oh, okay, Eliyahu shows up, then Eliyahu will, when Eliyahu shows up, we will drink a 5th cup. I think the Vilna Gaon is still a better formulation of this combination, but it's variations on the same idea. Rabbi Zivotofsky, in his article, "What's the Truth About Eliyahu Hanavi at the Seder," concludes at the end of our article, where did the idea that Eliyahu comes to visit at the Seder come from? A confluence, coming together of factors, makes it almost inevitable that such an idea would develop. First, there's a direct link between Brit and Pesach. We said this near the beginning. Well, actually, we said this in the middle. There's an idea of an association between Eliyahu and Brit. Brit and Pesach, we said on this page with Rav Chagiz. Secondly, like the connection between the blood of Brit Milah and the blood of the Korban Pesach that's in the Haggadah itself. Secondly, the Kos Shel Eliyahu, according to many customs, is poured just before the doors open. Oh, we're pouring the cup. We're opening the door. Who are we opening the door for? Oh, it must be for Eliyahu. And while the door is open, a series of verses with messianic overtones is recited. The idea that God will avenge us against our enemies. When is that going to happen? When the redemption happens. When Mashiach comes with Eliyahu. So you have, and Eliyahu is associated with coming to every Brit Milah. Brit Milah is associated with Pesach. The point is, these are a bunch of dots that are connected together. So most likely, Rabbi Zivotofsky concludes, most likely the combination of these practices led some to conclude that the cup is poured for Eliyahu who secretly enters. So that would explain where this idea came from. We don't know for sure, but just connecting the dots, it explains why we don't find in any classic rabbinic sources that Eliyahu shows up at our Seder, but connections between Eliyahu, Brit Milah, and possibly opening the door, those connections are there associated with the end of the Seder. And then, something that I only mentioned at the beginning, but I'll come back to, that there are a bunch of customs already mentioned at the time of the Gemara to do weird things at the Seder in order to keep your children awake. The Talmud speaks about putting a little table down and then like yanking it away. So the kids will ask, what are you doing? And the answer is not because of something substantive. The answer is, oh, I did that so that you would ask the question, why is this night different from all other nights? So there are a bunch of customs and weird things that various families and communities do in order to keep the kids interested. This, while it doesn't appear in the classic sources, this became one more thing to keep kids awake. Afi Cohen turned that into a treasure hunt. That became a thing to keep the kids awake. That extra cup, for whatever reason, there's an extra cup. Oh, it's because Eliyahu is showing up. Oh, that became another thing to keep the kids awake. So fine, it doesn't matter where it came from. I like the artwork that I showed near the beginning. Once it became a thing that to keep kids awake, well, then there's no turning back. I'd like to conclude before I take questions. I'd like to conclude with a quote that's not on the source sheet, but it's from a book called The Passover Seder, Afi Cohen in Exile by Ruth Gruber Fredman. It's a book of, I guess you'd call it, socio analyses of the Seder. I don't know how to describe it, but she suggests that at the Seder there's a sense of community. There's this, we're sitting around the table, and we are doing the Seder just like our ancestors did the Seder, all the way back 3,000 years ago. To open the door, which is a kind of a boundary, to open the door would seem to break this circle unless, in fact, it extends the circle to other homes where the doors are also being opened. So in other words, we imagine that I know everybody really does it at a different time, but theoretically, everybody opens the door at the same time so that Jews around the world can see or hear that we're all doing the Seder. So hold that thought. She goes on to say, we have this folk concept that Eliyahu wanders the earth, and that became the showing up at every Seder. So through the medium of Eliyahu and the open door, suggests Ruth Gruber Fredman, Jews share the Pesach Seder with all the other Jews who are celebrating the Seder throughout the world at the same time. And because Eliyahu is eternal, right? He never died. He's been present at every Seder throughout history, past, present, and future. So opening the door not only connects us to the Jews in the present, through Eliyahu connects us to Jews to all other Jewish communities, past, present, and future. It's a fascinating idea that I didn't see anywhere else. Anyway, that's what I have to say on this subject. Does anybody want to ask a question, either in the chat or by unmuting yourself. In any case, thanks for joining me, and please continue to attend the other Web Yeshiva classes, whether there's only a couple more live ones because we're near the end of the Seder. But all the others are from this year are on the Web Yeshiva website, and the last 2 or 3 years are all also available on Web Yeshiva's YouTube channel. Okay, questions, comments, objections?
Thank you so much, Rabbi Cohen. Have a wonderful Pesach. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Excellent share.
Okay. So thanks again.
Barech Sameach.
Barech Sameach to you too. Gonna end the recording.
Uri, I have a quick question.
Oh, sure. Okay. Continue with the recording.
The actual kos itself, what was the connection by the Vilna Gaon in terms of the blood libelness to the it wasn't the kos, it was no. Okay, that's what I want to clarify.
The blood libel was the theory from the Rabbi Siegel from the
Brit Milah.
1800s. Why to open the door at the same time as saying pour out your wrath against our enemies.
Right.
So the Vilna Gaon doesn't relate to the opening the door, and Rabbi Siegel doesn't relate to the cup. But it's interesting that we do them together, and they might both be correct, because they almost certainly developed separately. Opening the door goes back more than 1,000 years, and the cup, we only have mention of it the last 600 years. Practically yesterday in Jewish history.
Excellent. And the idea of in the 1800s that they would leave the door open the whole time because they were afraid that there might be a dead body outside your door. They're afraid because of the pogroms that were happening at that time.
Yeah.
But doesn't Shvoch HaMatcha go back much earlier than the 1800s? So how do we connect that to say all of a sudden it becomes something we're afraid of because of the pogroms? That's what.
No. So the idea, different parts of the Seder developed at different times. The thinking about the redemption in the future, that's relatively early historically. That Hallel and Nirtza are associated with redemption in the future. At some point after that, or as part of that, Shvoch HaMatcha became associated with. Before we say Hallel, we just want to remind God that when He redeems us, we hope that He brings justice to our enemies. And then separate from that was the opening of the door, which may or may not have been done connected to pour out your wrath against our enemies. I understand why people would want to associate it with Eliyahu, because either they want to give it a positive spin or because they're not so much worried about our enemies. But Jews who were living at a time when there really were enemies lurking outside, presumably when they said, pour out your wrath against our enemies, presumably had their enemies, their current enemies in mind. So not all these things connect to each other, but it's interesting to see how in different generations, different aspects, the Seder becomes more real or becomes very vivid when it connects to your life, to your personal life in some way or other. So Jews who are doing the Seder in persecution, a lot of parts of the Seder become very very meaningful. So it could be, remember, like we said, the first explanation, as far as I know, the first time anybody ever connected the opening the door to the blood libels was in the 1800s, much, much later, kind of looking back and saying maybe that's why. We don't have evidence of it, but we do know that there were blood libels, so who knows? Who knows? That might have been connected.
Shkoyach, thank you. What a beautiful shir, and gave us lots to think about for the Seder. Beautiful. Thanks.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Okay.
Chag Kasher V'Sameach.
Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Thanks to everybody for joining me. I'm going to end the recording and wrap it up.